Okay, so we have been working on factoring, and we've done slide and divide, and we figured out this really isn't that hard. You know all those rules. Now let me tell you about the rule that I haven't told you about yet. And I guess that makes sense. I bet you're thinking, yes, I hope you do tell me something I don't know about yet. Here's the new rule. And actually this rule is the first rule of factoring. Okay, so this new rule is the first rule. Now we're not going to change any of our steps, but we do have to do this rule first all the time. And here's the first rule of factoring. You have to check for a greatest common factor. All right, let's just get into this and let me show you what I mean. And I'll also say, if you don't check for greatest common factor, you're going to think that your answer is correct and everything's going to look good, but it's actually going to be wrong. So make sure that you're checking for this. All right, so enough said. Let's look at this first one. On this first one, I'm looking at my coefficients, 2, -14, and 24, and I'm asking myself, is there a number that I can divide out of all of those? Is there a greatest common factor? And in fact, there is. I can factor a 2 out of each one of those. So if I factor a 2 out of this, what I'm left with, 2 divided by 2 is just 1. All I have left is a 1x squared. -14 divided by 2 is going to be -7x. And 24 divided by 2 is going to be a 12. So that's the first thing I do. Next thing I have to do is just actually factor what's left. So I'm going to have the 2 out front. Now I'm looking for numbers that multiply to get 12 and add to get 7. That's going to be 4 and 3. The bigger number always gets the first sign, so that's going to be a -4. And since that's a plus, the signs are going to be the same. So that part is not different. Okay, the only part that's different is the first part. But this is our final answer. Let's look at the next one. First step of factoring. Ask yourself, is there a greatest common factor? 3, 45, and 150? Yes, there is. I can divide all of those by 3. So if I factor out a 3, 3 divided by 3 is just 1x squared. 45 divided by 3 is 15x. And 150 divided by 3 is going to be 50. All right, so now we're back to right where we were in all the previous lessons. So I need to put in my x's, and I'm looking for a number that multiplies to get 50 and adds to get 15. 10 and 5. 10 and 5 multiplies to get 50 and adds to get 15. Bigger number always gets the first sign, so that's going to be a plus right there. And since this is a plus over here, it means these two signs have to be the same. We've got 3 times x plus 10 times x plus 5, and that is factored. Let's look at the next one. Well, I don't see a greatest common factor there. The coefficients are -1, 8, and 20. I don't see that. But this is one of the first times that we've seen a negative x squared. I don't like that up there. We've seen negatives other places, but we've never seen our first value, our x squared, have a negative value. So here's what we're actually going to have to do. If that's ever negative, if our x squared is negative, we're going to actually factor out a -1. That basically is just going to change our signs. So we factor -1 out of the first one, that's going to be an x squared. Then this would be a -8x, and then a -20. So now I'm right back to where I was in all the previous lessons. X and x multiplies to get 20, subtracts to get 8. 10 and 2. That's going to be 10 and 2. Bigger number always gets the first sign. That minus is always going to go with the bigger number. And then this minus, the second one, that means if that's a minus, these two signs have to be opposite. So we've got a -10 and a +2. Okay, let's look at the next one. Is there a greatest common factor here? There is. I can divide all of those by 5. So this is going to just be an x squared. 30 divided by 6 is going to be 30 divided by 5 is going to be 6x. And 135 divided by 5 is going to be 27. All right, now I am right back to where I was all of those previous lessons. So right now I'm looking for numbers that multiply to get 27 and subtract to get 6. That sounds like a 9 and 3 to me. Multiplies to get 27, subtracts to get 6. This first sign, so that plus has to go with the bigger number. So that's going to go with the 9. And since this is a minus, a negative 27, these two signs down here have to be opposite. So I've got a plus 9 and a minus 3. Let's look at this last one. Ooh, this one looks hard because this is the first time I've seen an x to the third. And I also see other bad news. All of them have x's, and I haven't seen that. Every term has an x in it. We got an x to the third, x squared, and x. But actually, that's really good that they all have an x in it, because x is our greatest common factor, and we can factor out an x from this. So if we factor out an x, what do we have left? X to the third, we factor out an x. That's just going to be x squared. We factor an x out of the next one. That's going to be 12x. And when we factor an x out of the last one, it's going to be plus 32. All right? Now, I know I did that fast, so if you didn't see how exactly I got there, pause it, look at it, study it, but make sure you see. Just take an x out of each one of those terms. All right? But now, I've just got an x squared in there, and I am ready to factor this just like I did before. So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to get 32 and add to get 12. Multiplies to get 32, adds to get 12. That's going to be a 8 and a 4. 8 and a 4. So next we're going to have a minus. That's going to go with the biggest number. So that's going to be with the 8. And this plus over here, that means that these two signs on the bottom are the same. So a minus 8, and that's also going to be a minus 4. So that is factored. All right, now all of my examples, that number in front of the x squared was our greatest common factor, but they're not all going to be like that. Sometimes you're going to factor something else out, and you're still going to be left with a number in front of your x squared, and then you're just going to have to slide and divide, okay? But remember, what is always the first rule of factoring? The first rule of factoring is always look for the greatest common factor, all right? I know you've got this. Good luck.